August 4, 1962, 36 hours before her death, Marilyn Monroe sat in her Brentwood home with a reporter from Life magazine, surrounded by books, not movie scripts. Books: James Joyce, Heinrich Heine, Rainer Maria Rilke, in German, which she'd been teaching herself for 2 years. The reporter, mesmerized, asked why she'd never told anyone she was this well-read, this intellectually curious, this sharp. Marilyn's answer, recorded in notes that wouldn't be discovered for 40 years, because the moment I stop being stupid, I stop being Marilyn, and if I stop being Marilyn, I'm nothing. But that wasn't entirely true. The real reason was darker, more dangerous. 3 days earlier, she'd had her final phone call with Robert Kennedy. According to FBI wiretaps declassified in 2006, they hadn't been discussing their affair. They'd been arguing about something else entirely. Her plans to hold a press conference. She was going to reveal everything, not the affairs, not the scandals, but something Hollywood feared far more. She was going to prove she wasn't the dumb blonde they'd sold to America. She had the IQ test results. She had her college transcripts. She had letters from her acting coach Lee Strasberg calling her the most intellectually curious student I've ever taught. She was going to destroy her own image, burn down the fantasy, and emerge as Norma Jean Baker, intellectual, artist, serious actress. And she was going to do it in 72 hours. The studio executives panicked. Her lawyers received threatening calls. Her psychiatrist was pressured to increase her medication. Because if Marilyn Monroe proved she'd been playing dumb for a decade, every man who'd dismissed her, every director who'd patronized her, every studio head who'd built a fortune on her fake stupidity would be exposed as the real fools. But Marilyn never made it to that press conference. On August 5, 1962, she was found dead in her bedroom, surrounded by books she wasn't supposed to be smart enough to read, clutching secrets Hollywood would spend 60 years trying to bury. The question isn't whether Marilyn Monroe was a genius. The records prove she was. The question is, did that genius get her killed? If you're intrigued by the untold truth behind Hollywood's greatest illusion, subscribe now to uncover the secrets they never wanted you to know. The official story started in 1944, when a photographer discovered a beautiful young woman working at the Radioplane Munitions Factory in Van Nuys, California. Her name was Norma Jean Dougherty. She was 19 years old, recently married, with natural light brown hair and a nervous stammer. The photographer saw something in her face and suggested she try modeling. Within 2 years, she'd bleached her hair platinum blonde, divorced her husband, changed her name to Marilyn Monroe, and signed her first contract with 20th Century Fox. It was the classic Hollywood fairy tale: poor factory girl transforms into movie star through luck and natural beauty. Except almost none of it was true. What the studio publicity department never mentioned was that Norma Jean had been reading Tolstoy on her lunch breaks, taking evening classes in literature at UCLA Extension, paying for them with her factory wages. She'd been writing poetry in notebooks she kept hidden from her husband, who told her that intellectual pursuits weren't feminine. And when she walked into that first screen test at Fox, she wasn't the naive ingenue they expected. She was a young woman who'd spent her entire childhood in foster homes and orphanages, reading as an escape, teaching herself about art and philosophy, and the world beyond the poverty she'd been born into. But the moment studio executive Ben Lyons saw her, he saw something else entirely. He saw a body, a face, a fantasy, and he saw dollar signs. In March 1952, all contract players at 20th Century Fox were required to undergo psychological evaluations and aptitude testing. Marilyn Monroe sat for her evaluation on a Tuesday afternoon. The testing took 4 hours. She worked through spatial reasoning puzzles, verbal analogies, mathematical problems, and abstract pattern recognition. The studio psychologist administering the test noticed something unusual. She was completing sections faster than anyone he'd ever tested. She wasn't guessing. She was calculating, analyzing, solving complex problems with speed and accuracy that suggested something far beyond average intelligence. When the results came back, the psychologist called for a retest. He thought there must have been an error. They tested her again. Same result. Her IQ score was 168, placing her in the 99th percentile, in the same range as Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and Marie Curie. The studio psychologist delivered the results personally to Darryl F. Zanuck, head of 20th Century Fox. Zanuck read the report 3 times. Then he called an emergency meeting with the studio's head of publicity and Marilyn's personal handler. The meeting lasted 7 minutes. Their decision was immediate and unanimous. The test results would be classified, removed from Marilyn's official file, and locked in Zanuck's personal safe. No one outside that room would ever know. Because 20th Century Fox had just spent 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars building Marilyn Monroe into something very specific, the dumb blonde. The girl next door with the killer body and childlike innocence, the sexpot who made men feel powerful and intelligent by comparison. They'd created her to be beautiful and harmless, desired but never threatening. An IQ of 168 changed everything. It meant Marilyn Monroe was smarter than her directors, smarter than her producers, smarter than almost everyone on the Fox lot. It meant she could understand the contracts she was signing, could question the roles she was being forced to play, could see through the manipulation and exploitation that defined the studio system, and that terrified them, so they buried it. But Marilyn already knew she was smart. She'd always known. What she didn't have was proof that would make Hollywood take her seriously, so she began pursuing it in secret. In 1951, while filming, she enrolled in literature courses at UCLA Extension under a fake name. She studied English, Romantic poetry, Russian literature, and Renaissance art history. She paid for the classes in cash, attended lectures at night after shooting, and never told anyone at the studio. Her professors had no idea that the quiet young woman in the back row, wearing glasses and a scarf over her hair, was Marilyn Monroe. She earned top marks in every class. By 1952, Marilyn Monroe, the movie star, was becoming a phenomenon. Niagara, in 1953, made her a household name. The posters showed her in a tight red dress, everything about her screaming sex. Audiences packed theaters. Critics dismissed her as another blonde bombshell. And behind closed doors, Marilyn read Dostoevsky and wept. She kept her books hidden in trunks under her bed, in closets behind her clothes, in storage units she rented under false names. Her personal library grew to include first editions of Proust, complete works of Chekhov, volumes of philosophy by Spinoza and Schopenhauer, psychology texts by Freud and Jung. She annotated them in the margins, argued with the authors, cross-referenced ideas across disciplines. She taught herself basic German to read Rilke in the original. She studied Russian grammar to understand the nuances lost in English translations of Tolstoy. And she did it all in secret, terrified that if Hollywood discovered who she really was, they'd destroy the illusion that made her valuable. In 1955, everything changed when Marilyn moved to New York City. She was exhausted from years of playing dumb, tired of being treated like a beautiful object. She suspended her contract with Fox and enrolled in the Actors Studio, studying under Lee Strasberg. For the first time in her career, she was surrounded by people who wanted her to think, to analyze, to bring depth to her performances. It was at a party in Manhattan that she met Arthur Miller. He was already one of America's most respected playwrights, famous for Death of a Salesman and The Crucible. He'd seen Marilyn in films and dismissed her as exactly what she appeared to be, another Hollywood blonde with nothing between her ears. When his friend invited him to meet her, Miller almost declined, but curiosity won. He arrived expecting to exchange pleasantries for 5 minutes. Instead, he stayed for 4 hours, because the woman he met wasn't the Marilyn Monroe he'd seen on screen. She greeted him without the breathy voice, without the exaggerated femininity. She wore glasses, her hair was pulled back. She spoke in a normal register, clear and articulate, and within 10 minutes she'd referenced The Crucible and connected it to themes in Kafka's The Trial, which she'd just finished reading. Miller was stunned. They talked about literature, about McCarthyism, about the responsibility of artists. Marilyn quoted Stanislavski's theories and asked Miller's opinion on whether American theater was too focused on realism. She mentioned reading Greek tragedies and saw echoes of Euripides in his work. By the evening's end, Miller said something he'd later repeat in interviews: "That wasn't the woman I expected to meet. I expected a movie star. I met an intellectual." They began a relationship that led to marriage in 1956, but it was complicated by the fundamental tension that defined Marilyn's existence. With Miller, she could be herself. She could discuss books, debate ideas, express opinions without playing dumb. For the first time in years, she felt seen for who she really was. But the moment she stepped in front of a camera, she had to become someone else. She had to be Marilyn, and that split was tearing her apart. When Marilyn died in August 1962, the items found in her Brentwood home shocked everyone. In her bedroom alone, there were over 400 books, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with volumes in English, German, French, and Russian, first editions of Hemingway and Fitzgerald, complete works of Freud, poetry by Yeats, Eliot, and Whitman, philosophy by Nietzsche and Sartre. And everywhere in the margins of these books were Marilyn's handwritten notes. In her copy of Joyce's Ulysses, she'd written commentary comparing Joyce's stream of consciousness to cinematic montage editing. In her Wordsworth volume, she'd annotated Tintern Abbey with thoughts on memory and loss of childhood innocence. In her Dostoevsky paperback, she'd filled margins with questions about faith, suffering, and moral responsibility. These weren't the books of someone pretending. These were the books of a serious reader engaged deeply with ideas. The press didn't know what to do with this information. It didn't fit the Marilyn Monroe they'd been selling to America, so most outlets simply didn't report it. The few that mentioned her library dismissed it as eccentric, suggesting she'd bought them for decoration. But those close to her knew better. Lee Strasberg told reporters that Marilyn had been the most intellectually curious student he'd ever taught. Her photographer friend Milton Green revealed she'd been taking college courses and earning straight-A grades. The evidence was overwhelming. Marilyn Monroe had been exceptionally intelligent, widely read, and deeply engaged with intellectual pursuits. But Hollywood had spent her entire career making sure nobody knew. Throughout the 1950s, as Marilyn's fame grew, she fought for roles that would let her prove she was more than a dumb blonde. She wanted complex characters, women with depth and intelligence. The studios refused every time. In 1954, she wanted the lead in The Brothers Karamazov at MGM. She'd read the novel 3 times and written extensive character analysis. The studio heads laughed. They told her Russian literature was beyond her range. The role went to Maria Schell. In 1956, she fought for Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's. She'd read Capote's novella and understood the character's complexity. Capote himself was enthusiastic. But Paramount wanted Audrey Hepburn, not a sexpot. Again and again the pattern repeated. She'd request dramatic roles. Studios would offer variations of the same character. The gorgeous blonde who men desired, sexy but harmless. The one exception came in 1959 with Some Like It Hot. Director Billy Wilder layered Sugar Cane with self-awareness. Marilyn revealed she understood Sugar was performing stupidity as survival strategy, much like herself. The film became a massive hit, but even then, praise focused on her sex appeal, not her intelligence. No one in Hollywood seemed willing to acknowledge what was obvious. Marilyn Monroe was a gifted actress being systematically prevented from proving it. By 1960, years of playing dumb had taken their toll. Marilyn was dependent on barbiturates and amphetamines. The addiction that started as coping with pressure was now destroying her ability to break free. In early 1962, Marilyn started meeting with journalists. She talked about wanting to produce her own films, to adapt literary works, to control her image. She mentioned having documents proving she had the intelligence and education to be taken seriously. Those close to her knew what she meant. She was going to reveal the IQ test results, produce her college transcripts, destroy the dumb blonde image once and for all. Studio executives panicked. If she proved she'd been playing a character all along, it would expose the entire system. It would show the world that the woman they'd been selling as a dumb blonde had been smarter than the men selling her. And in 1962, Hollywood, that was unforgivable. In late July 1962, Marilyn was fired from Something's Got to Give by Fox. The studio claimed she was unreliable. They sued her for $500,000. Marilyn's lawyers argued the studio had been undermining her, setting her up to fail so they could silence her plans for independence. In the days after her firing, Marilyn made significant phone calls. She spoke with her publicist about interviews, discussing her education. She called her lawyer about retrieving documents from studio files. On August 3rd, 2 days before her death, Marilyn met with her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. According to notes that surfaced later, she told him she was tired of pretending to be stupid, tired of hiding who she was. She wanted to quit acting, maybe teach drama, or write about film theory. Greenson noted she seemed determined, speaking about finally being free to be smart. He also noted she was mixing medications dangerously. On August 4th, the Life magazine reporter visited and found her surrounded by books. On August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead. The official cause was probable suicide by barbiturate overdose. But circumstances were suspicious. Her personal papers and books were missing. The diary containing notes about Kennedy conversations and her Hollywood exposé plans was never found. Whether Marilyn took her own life, accidentally overdosed, or was silenced, we may never know. But this we know: a woman with an IQ of 168, who'd read Dostoevsky and Freud and Joyce, who'd fought to be taken seriously, died alone in a bedroom full of books she wasn't supposed to understand. In the 60-plus years since her death, evidence has continued surfacing. In 1999, Christie's sold items from Marilyn's estate, including hundreds of books with her annotations. Scholars found sophisticated literary analysis, philosophical questions, cross-references between texts. In 2006, FBI files were declassified, revealing transcripts showing her speaking articulately about politics and international relations. In 2012, UCLA researchers discovered enrollment records showing Norma DiMaggio had taken literature courses between 1951 and 1954, earning high marks. In 2016, the actual IQ test results from 1952 surfaced. A score of 168 placed her in the top 0.1% of the population. The document included notes describing Marilyn as highly articulate, exceptionally well-read, and capable of sophisticated abstract reasoning. One note stood out: subject appears to be deliberately downplaying intellectual capabilities in social interactions, possibly as learned behavior. Even the psychologist noticed Marilyn had been pretending to be dumber than she was. Why would Hollywood suppress her intelligence? The answer lies in economics and psychology. Hollywood wasn't selling just entertainment, they were selling fantasy. The most profitable fantasy was the beautiful woman who made men feel powerful. Audiences didn't want women smarter than them. A smart Marilyn Monroe would have disrupted everything. If audiences knew she had Einstein-level IQ, that she read Russian literature and studied philosophy, she'd no longer be accessible fantasy. She'd be intimidating, challenging, threatening. But it was more than economics. It was about power. Studios controlled stars through restrictive contracts. An intelligent Marilyn, who understood contract law, who could analyze her market value, would be impossible to control. And there was a darker element: the egos of men running Hollywood. Most executives had no college educations. The idea that Marilyn was smarter than them was intolerable. It meant every time they'd dismissed her, they'd been dealing with someone who saw through their manipulation, so they kept her trapped in the dumb blonde box. They gave her pills to cope. They fired her when she fought back, And when she decided to reveal the truth, the pressure had already broken her. For decades, Marilyn remained frozen in public imagination as the beautiful, tragic blonde. But slowly, as evidence accumulated, a different narrative emerged. Scholars wrote about the real Marilyn, the voracious reader, the woman with a 168 IQ forced to play dumb. In 2012, Michelle Williams said researching Marilyn completely changed her understanding. What shocked me was discovering how brilliant she was, how much she read, how hard she worked to be taken seriously. Other actresses echoed this. Anne Hathaway kept her Vassar education quiet because being too smart would hurt casting. Jennifer Lawrence talked about playing dumb to seem relatable. Natalie Portman hid her Harvard degree. In 2018, the Actors Studio named their library after Marilyn. The plaque reads, "For the actress who proved you could be both beautiful and brilliant, even when the world refused to see it." On August 5, 1962, Marilyn died with secrets hidden, her press conference never held, her proof of intelligence never revealed, but the evidence survived. The test results, the books, the transcripts, the annotations, all painting a picture at odds with the accepted image. Today, 60 years later, we're finally understanding who Marilyn Monroe really was. Not a dumb blonde, but a brilliant woman forced to play one. Not a tragic victim of limitations, but a genius prevented from reaching potential. The question isn't whether Marilyn was smart. Evidence proves she was. The question is, how many other women have had their intelligence suppressed because society found it more profitable to keep them playing dumb? Marilyn died trying to prove she was more than Hollywood's creation. She died with Dostoevsky on her nightstand and dangerous thoughts in her diary. And she died knowing that the dumbest thing about Marilyn Monroe was believing she needed to play dumb to be loved. The genius was always there. She just wasn't allowed to show it until it was too late.